Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel where we talk everything science. My name is Aubrey Molln and I will be your presenter today. For those of you who have watched some of my previous videos, probably one that's covering the major regions of the brain, this one's going to be slightly different. So actually in this particular presentation, I'm going to be doing a review of a scientific journal article called Left Brain, Right Brain, Facts and Fantasies by Michael Corballis. So if you are interested, stick around. If you're not, go watch some other cool videos on the internet because there's quite a few of them. And if you want to see my previously made video about the brain, I will put the link for that in the description box below. So without further ado, let's get to it. So we're going to jump right in here. In the article, Left Brain, Right Brain, Facts and Fantasies, Corballis actually hits on some pretty definitive points. And I'm actually going to use this diagram here to star some important things that he talks about. For instance, if we're looking at the right brain characteristics, he really focuses on the left hand control, or what you call handedness, and he also connects the right brain function to things like holistic thought and emotion. So that's going to be some big things with the right brain, but this article will mainly focus on more of the left brain functions and asymmetries that the brain holds. For instance, the biggest one that he talks about is again that handedness, if somebody's left or right handed. And then also, he talks mainly about language and its connection to the different brain hemispheres and how they kind of interact to make language or gesturing possible. So I thought that this was a good diagram to start us off with, kind of star those main ideas as we begin this review. For those of you who have actually already watched my major regions of the brain video, this slide might look pretty familiar. And I think that it's a very good composition of what the hemispheres of the brain look like and then what sides they control mainly for the body. And one thing I should mention is that in this slideshow, every brain that you see, the left brain is going to be colored in blue, and then the right side brain and the movements and control that's associated with it will be notated in orange. So as you can see here, the brain, I'll grab my little laser pointer, the brain here, left side is blue, right side is orange. And I included it because I feel like it illustrates a very good main point that Corballis was trying to get at in his article. What he's really talking about is the brain asymmetries and handedness, which I kind of already touched on in those main ideas from the previous slide. Here he talks about the history of people being right-handed and left-handed, how it's thought to be an evolutionary precursor of the left hemisphere being slightly enlarged, and the reasoning behind why a majority of the population could be right-handed. And part of it could be genetics, as said in the article, and other parts could be just social constructs, such as a lot of people put symbolism with which hand somebody writes with. For instance, not too long ago, people would associate being left-handed with being evil, while right-handed people were righteous in a more religious perspective. And unfortunately, I believe that my sister would have been left-handed, but from a young age, her young teacher, so her kindergarten teacher or first grade teacher, one of those in the lower levels, believed that left-handedness was bad. It was, she didn't want my sister growing up with being left-handed because she thought and assimilated it to being evil. So my sister has very poor handwriting, God bless her heart, but I think that she should have been left-handed. So this kind of superstition and the myths surrounding good and evil for being left or right-handed, I found very interesting. As we continue on with the article, we also find that Corballis is talking about how this brain asymmetry between the hemispheres is not uniquely human. So there have been different functions associated with certain hemispheres throughout vertebrates and invertebrates. For instance, in primates, they find that they are also predominantly right-handed. They've also found that in marine mammals and other primates, left hemisphere action bias are the same as humans. So it's very interesting how they can associate and find that gestures, speech, and uses of tools could be a common precursor for our evolution and how our brain hemispheres develop the biases that we currently have. While we're on the topic of handedness, I think it's really important to point out that in the journal article, Corballis talks about which hand is dominant in certain percentage of people, as well as the correlating cerebral asymmetries. And this goes as far as before anybody's even born. So part of his journal article talks about the observations of fetuses. And they found that at the 10th week of gestation, a majority of the subjects that they were observing were actually found sucking their right thumb as opposed to their left, which they believe has some predictive power of what that person's primary hand, or I should say handedness, will be when they become an adult. They also talk about the prenatal brain asymmetries that surround their subjects, and they believe that 2/3 of the cases show that leftward bias. Remember, leftward bias is associated with right-handedness because humans are crosswired. And it's also interesting too because not only in humans, but they find and believe in chimpanzees that 65 to 70% of the subjects or of the overall population are born with these particular or normal asymmetries. And going further in, I actually provided this diagram to show just the statistical difference on the world population and which hand people predominantly use. And in here, you can see that the right-handed people are more towards the 90 percentile, while left-handed people are closer to that 12, 11%, while ambidextrous is less than 1%. And this difference, so remember 65 to 70% is inborn, so you already have it, and genetics play an influence from your parents and so on. But then the remaining percentage, that difference, is actually shaped by social constructs, as we talked about before. If left-handed people are believed to be evil, then more parents and teachers and people of influence on a child will try to sway them to become more right-handed as they grow older. And since ambidextrous people are notated on this diagram too, Corballis also talks about that in a way, and it's kind of interesting because they associate, or I should say the scientific community at this point has associated disability, failure of cerebral dominance to be associated with being ambidextrous or the lack of favoring one hand over the other. And things like stuttering, academic skill deficits, and mental health difficulties like schizophrenia, they are currently studying that and seeing if there's an actual tie between that and somebody who is ambidextrous. Again, I included this diagram because I thought it would be very helpful just to show that visual ratio between right-handed people, left-handed people, and those who don't have a definitive predominant hand. Aside from handedness, Corballis talks mainly about the cerebral asymmetries and their correlation to language. And in his definition of language, it's not just vocalization. Even though other animals besides humans have been shown to show vocalization, such as primates, mice, and frogs, they also include sign language in this definition of language as well. So keeping that in mind, I provided this picture that's actually directly from the article, and it shows that there are similar brain regions associated to similar parts or functions of the brain. For instance, the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area that are both associated with speech. So one is to help you form speech and the other one helps you understand and process speech. They found that there are homologous regions found in a chimpanzee's brain. And this is a big deal in science because this is kind of notating that we could have a evolutionary precursor that could be drawn back to this particular anomaly. However, it's very interesting because the article talks about how this evolution occurred through language, but not necessarily through primates vocalizing. They talk more about how this language that developed into human speech actually started more from manual gestures and the use of tools, so more of movement involvement. They then segue into talking about mirror neurons, which are actually a part of a system that helps calibrate movements and conform to certain perceptions. And a while back, they actually were hyping up mirror neurons. This is where you observe somebody doing something and then you try to repeat it. But mirror neurons are actually more involved than that. Instead of just direct imitation of what one sees somebody else do or say, that also helps create a pathway to learn how to expand upon those movements, which would then segue into evolution. Then closer to the end of the article, Corballis talks about and connects the handedness to the language function of the brain. So interesting statistics that he brought up was 95 to 99% of people who are right-handed showed evidence of being left-brained for language use. And another interesting point that they brought up was even though you're right-handed, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be left brain biased and vice versa for left-handed people. For instance, if you're in the 99 percentile for being right-handed, left-brained, then they did a study on left-handed people, but they found that 70% of these individuals had a brain asymmetry for language that correlated with the same left bias. So a very interesting find. So long story short, they found that both right-handed individuals and left-handed individuals were both left hemisphere dominant for language. And an experiment that was done in I think it was the 1980s, there was people, actually it was 1960s, there was people who were suffering from severe epilepsy and actually had to have a split brain surgery, meaning that their hemispheres were cut to help alleviate their epileptic symptoms. And during these surgeries or after the surgeries took place, they actually studied these individuals to see which side of which hemisphere was associated more to which actions. And they actually proved that the left side hemisphere was specialized for more of your language, which is that Broca and Wernicke's regions, which you see in the picture. And then they also found that the right hemisphere was more attached to emotional and nonverbal functions. And in the end, Roger W. Sperry, who founded this, actually won a Nobel Peace Prize in 1981. So this article was very well done. It had made a lot of good points, and it specifically focused on that handedness in the language. So I think that concludes the review. If you want to find out more, I will have the citation in the next slide. And that concludes this presentation. Thank you guys so much for coming out and listening to this review on Left Brain, Right Brain, Facts and Fantasies by Corballis. If you are interested to read this article yourself, it is listed here on the very top of my references. The other references are for the images that I used in the order that they appear. Again, thank you so much for listening to my presentation. If you are interested, feel free to look up more of my videos where we talk about science. But until then, I hope you all have a beautiful day.